let's have a look at this graph over here, in which we're going to measure the success that we have at something over time. Now, the first step is always to understand, where do we start? We are always starting something. And the only way for us to set goals that make sense, to move into a direction that makes sense, is when we understand where we currently are, right? For example, if my goal is to run a 10K, that goal is going to be very different depending on my starting point. Let's say, for example, that I just trained for a marathon. Doing this 10K run is going to be peanuts. It's not even really a goal. I can just go out and do it. But let's say, for example, that I am paralyzed from the waist down. I'm living in a wheelchair. I can quite literally not run a 10K. I could maybe ride a 10K, but it will be impossible for me to reach this goal. So all of that depends on the place where we start, right? So this part of reflection is already very important. It's the preemptive reflection. Before we even go do something, ask ourselves, okay, where am I currently standing? Then after the starting point, we have a goal, right? This is the place where we are planning to go. This is the achievement or the thing or the whatever. It's the goal. It's the place that we orient ourselves into. Now, once we start moving towards that goal, ultimately, as time progresses, we will get to a certain result, right? So we've been doing this thing, we've been trying to move towards that goal, but then we took some actions and ultimately we ended up at this result over here. Now, what you can see is that the result is not as high as the initial goal that we set. And the gap that arises between these two is what we call the production capacity gap. Now, if you've seen the project tracker video, we had a very deep exploration of production capacity. And production capacity is basically the combination of our knowledge and our execution. So it's knowing the right thing to do and actually doing it. So if this was the goal, if this is where we wanted to go, we either lacked the right information or we didn't take the right actions, or we didn't take enough actions, right? So there's a gap here, which we call the production capacity gap. This means that if in the future we want to reach that goal, we should have enough production capacity. Otherwise, our result will always be less than the initial goal that we set. But there is another gap, namely the gap between the initial goal that we set and the potential max capacity that we have. Let's say, for example, that I have a goal of running a marathon. That goal already seems very audacious. That's something that I want to do. But maybe at this point, I didn't realize that what I actually wanted to do was a triathlon, because I don't just like running, I also like swimming and I also like biking. So instead of training for a full marathon, maybe I just want to train for a half triathlon. Now, to outward appearances, this isn't necessarily better in some way, but it's about our experience. It's our personal vision on what success is. And I could have done something that was more enriching, more nourishing, more successful for me had I set the optimal goal, right? My maximal potential of success. And the gap between the goals that I set and the maximal potential that I could reach in this given time, that is what we call the wisdom gap. This is a lack of wisdom, a lack of insight. I don't know myself well enough to know what it is that I truly want. And that is why we have reflection. Reflection is all about trying to figure out what it is that I truly want. It's about closing that wisdom gap so that I know what my personal maximal potential is, and then I can actually set a goal to try to reach that potential. So from this place, right, we've reached this result over here. So this is going to be our new starting point. We can then once again do the exact same thing. We start over here, we set a goal for ourselves, but what might also happen is that I set a goal that is lower than the result that I actually got, right? Maybe my goal is to start a business and to earn 10,000 euros. And all of a sudden, this business turns out to be really awesome and just takes off and actually earns me 10 times that. In that case, the result was higher than the initial goal that we set. We get a negative gap in the production capacity. But important to note here is that we will never have a result that is higher than our potential, because this, by definition, is the maximum potential that we have. It's a perfect thing, and perfection is something that can never be reached. So this is sort of a motivator, an inspirator, but not something to be reached. There's always more potential. So this wisdom gap, the gap between the goal and the potential, is something that we can always grow in. And that is why reflection is so important, because it helps us fill this gap. It helps us to live a life that's more fulfilling, more successful by our own definition.